Many people try to talk to God through fear, repetition, or desperate requests. But Osho reveals that this very approach becomes the barrier that keeps them from experiencing the divine. The moment a person speaks to God as if God is somewhere far away, up in the sky, outside the body, separated from their own being, they create distance that does not actually exist. Osho teaches that God is not an external figure waiting to be convinced, pleased, or persuaded. God is the silent presence living at the center of your consciousness, the awareness that appears when all inner noise settles. Most people pray with a mind full of anxiety, guilt, and expectation, and they assume God is listening to every word they speak. But according to Osho, the divine cannot be reached through verbal effort, emotional pressure, or spiritual performance. Talking to God is not an act of speech, it is an act of surrender. The real mistake people make is believing that God responds to language. They think that repeating the same prayer or ritual will impress the universe or unlock divine favor. But God is not moved by the lips. God is experienced through the heart, through quietness, through a deep inner connection. When you speak from fear, you are not talking to God, you are talking to your own insecurity. When you beg, you are not communicating with the divine, you are expressing your distrust in life. And when you pray mechanically without awareness, you are simply echoing someone else's beliefs instead of discovering your own truth. Osho says that the true conversation with God begins only when you stop trying to talk and instead learn how to be present. This is why so many people feel unheard or spiritually disconnected. They believe God is ignoring them, when in reality they are too mentally noisy to sense the divine response. To speak with God correctly, you must understand that the divine communicates in silence, in intuition, in subtle guidance that can only be felt when the mind stops its constant chatter. This is why Osho emphasizes meditation not as a religious ritual, but as a method of clearing the inner space so that the divine presence can be experienced directly. In meditation, you do not talk to God, you become available to God. You become receptive, open, and attuned to the deeper intelligence of existence. When the mind becomes silent, when the heart becomes calm, when the inner world is no longer filled with fear or demand, a new dimension opens within you. You begin to feel a presence that is not separate from you, but is the very essence of your being. This is the correct way to talk to God, not through effort or pleading, but through inner stillness. The mistake most people make is approaching God with noise. The truth Osho reveals is that God can only be reached through silence. Most people believe they must speak in order for God to hear them. But Osho reveals something radically different. The divine hears you not through your words, but through your state of being. The universe responds to your vibration, not your vocabulary. Yet countless people approach God with tension, with fear, with expectation, and with a mind already overflowing with noise. They ask, they demand, they plead, they negotiate as if God were a distant ruler who needs constant persuasion. But this mindset creates more separation, because every desire-filled prayer reinforces the belief that God is outside of you, holding something you lack. Osho explains that when you talk to God from a place of longing and anxiety, you are actually affirming your own emptiness. You are telling existence, I am incomplete, I am disconnected. And whatever you affirm becomes your reality. So instead of feeling God's presence, you feel even more distant, more frustrated, more spiritually lost. Osho teaches that the real mistake people make is approaching God with a divided mind. One part wants something, another part doubts it, another part fears it, and another part wonders if anything is listening at all. This fragmentation weakens your inner energy. God can only be approached as a whole. Integrated being someone who is not begging for answers, but open to receiving clarity. Osho says that talking to God correctly means approaching the divine with a heart free of tension, not a heart filled with demand. When you ask from a place of fear, your fear becomes the real prayer. When you ask from a place of lack, your lack becomes the message. The divine does not respond to words. It responds to the energy behind the words. This is why OSHO emphasizes awareness over articulation. Awareness transforms your relationship with the divine. Instead of saying, give me strength, you start to realize that strength is already within you. Instead of saying, protect me, you begin to feel that existence has always been protecting you. Instead of saying, guide me, you discover that the guidance was always there. You were simply too noisy inside to hear it. A true communication with God is not an act of speaking, it is an act of listening. It is the willingness to be silent enough to sense the subtle whispers, intuition, inspiration, and clarity that the divine constantly sends. Osho says that when you stop forcing a conversation with God, the real conversation begins. Because God is not a person in the sky, God is the living intelligence within your own consciousness. God speaks through your insight, your intuition, your inner peace, your spontaneous clarity. But these can only arise when you are calm. This is why Osho warns, do not make the mistake of talking too much. Do not make the mistake of approaching God like a beggar. Instead, become silent, become conscious, and allow existence to reveal itself. In this silence, God is no longer something you talk to. God becomes something you experience. To talk to God correctly, Osho says you must reverse the entire direction of communication. Most people approach the divine the same way they approach the world, with effort, with pushing, with trying to make something happen. They pray as though they are entering a negotiation, a transaction, or a desperate plea. But the divine doesn't respond to force. God is not moved by insistence. God is revealed through receptivity. This is why Osho emphasizes that the real key is not speaking to God, but listening to God. Listening means surrendering your ego, surrendering your expectations, and allowing yourself to be open enough for existence to guide you. When you stop speaking, a deeper voice, the voice behind all voices, begins to emerge. Osho explains that true communication with God begins when you stop trying to convince the divine of your desires. You don't need to persuade existence to take care of you. Existence is already taking care of you. When you stop pushing your agenda, you create space for life to reveal its intelligence. Every moment becomes a message. Every silence becomes a teaching. But as long as you fill the space with your own noise, your own demands, your own fears, you cannot hear anything deeper than your own mind. And the mind can only repeat what it already knows. It cannot receive anything new. Listening to God means tuning into a frequency that is always there, but usually drowned out by mental chatter. This guidance does not come as a voice from the sky. It comes as intuition, clarity, insight, and subtle inner direction. Osho says that these signals are the true language of the divine. They do not shout, they whisper. They do not argue, they reveal. They do not force, they flow. And the only way to receive them is through inner stillness. When the mind becomes empty, even for a moment, a higher intelligence begins to shine through. You begin to feel what is right without needing to analyze it. You begin to sense what is true without needing proof. This intuitive clarity is God speaking. Osho teaches that most people never experience this because they are constantly filled with inner noise. They pray in confusion, hope in fear, and speak from restlessness. Their communication becomes a chaos of mixed signals, and the divine cannot penetrate that storm. To talk to God correctly, you must become inwardly quiet. You must shift from asking to allowing, from controlling to trusting, from grasping to openness. God cannot be reached through force, but God can be felt instantly through surrender. When you stop trying to shape existence and instead align yourself with it, you discover that life has always been guiding you in ways your mind never noticed. The moment you listen instead of insist, something miraculous happens. The answers you were chasing begin to arise on their own. Confusion transforms into clarity. Fear transforms into understanding. Restlessness transforms into peace. You realize that the divine was never silent, you are simply too loud inside to hear it. According to OSHO, this is the true way to be in conversation with God, not through words, but through awareness. Not through asking, but the right way to communicate with the divine, OSHO teaches, is through presence, through listening, not through effort, but through stillness, awareness and inner stillness. You don't need dramatic rituals, loud prayers, or elaborate techniques to reach God. You don't need to chant endlessly or prove your devotion. Existence does not need to be convinced. God is not a separate being waiting for you to perform the correct spiritual gestures. God is the subtle presence that awakens the moment you become conscious. The divine speaks most clearly when you are most silent. But silence does not mean simply the absence of sound. It means the absence of inner turmoil, inner arguments, and inner resistance. When your mind relaxes and your heart opens, you create the perfect space for divine connection. Osho explains that the mistake most people make is trying to control the process. They want God to answer in a specific way, at a specific time, in a specific form. They place expectations on the divine, and when life doesn't match those expectations, they feel abandoned or unheard. But God does not operate according to personal wishes. The divine responds according to your state of consciousness, not your demands. When you are tense, you distort the message. When you are peaceful, you receive it effortlessly. This is why Osho insists that the true way to talk to God is to stop talking altogether and allow yourself to experience the divine directly. In deep presence, you begin to sense a subtle intelligence moving through every moment. You notice that life itself becomes the teacher, the guide, the message, a thought arising at the right time, an inner knowing appearing out of nowhere, a sudden calmness washing over you. These are all forms of divine communication. But you can only perceive them when you are aware. Awareness sharpens your ability to feel the guidance that has always been present. When your mind is clouded with desire, fear, or overthinking, you miss these subtle signals. But when you are rooted in awareness, every moment becomes a doorway to deeper understanding. Osho says that real spirituality is not about escaping the world, but becoming fully conscious within it. When you are conscious, everything becomes sacred. Every breath becomes a prayer. Every moment becomes a meeting with the divine. You no longer feel the need to ask God for things because you recognize that you are already part of something far greater than your desires. You don't seek answers from outside yourself because you begin to see that the answers arise within you naturally when your inner space is clear. This is the essence of divine communication. God does not speak through words, but through the unfolding of life and the clarity of your own awareness. When you stop forcing the conversation and allow silence to speak, you realize that God has never been distant. The divine is not far away, hiding in the sky or dwelling in temples. God is the very center of your being. Every moment you turn inward, you come closer to this truth. The real mistake is believing that God must be reached through effort. The truth, Osho says, is that God is reached through relaxation, through openness, through deep, conscious presence. When the noise of the mind fades, the divine becomes undeniable. In that stillness, you don't just talk to God, you feel God. You become aligned with existence itself, and the boundary between you and the divine dissolves.